Hi, I'm Congressman Toff De Venecia. I represent the 4th District of Pangasinan, which is a province north of Metro Manila, the capital, I would say, of the country. I was formerly the chairperson of the Special Committee on Creative Industry and Performing Arts, formerly a deputy majority leader in the lower house, and currently still the lead convener of the Arts, Culture, and Creative Industries block, and as well as the prime mover behind the Philippine Creative Industries Development Act. So that's like my day job description. My side hustle is that I am a freelance theater director. I also manage two theater companies in the Philippines, and I write on occasion.
Okay, so prior to you becoming a politician, uh, you founded Soundbox. Can you tell us just a little bit about your creative work and how long you've been doing that as you started very young?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I found myself in one of the uh, locally made streaming platforms and found one of my films from yesteryear being streamed. So, yes, I used to be a child actor. I did that for about 5 years. And then I wrote for the Philippine Star for a good 13 years of my life as a columnist for Young Star and then a contributing editor. I also was the lifestyle editor of Chalk Magazine under ABS-CBN Publishing. And I also acted in some plays with Repertory Philippines before finding my calling backstage, being a production manager, assistant director, eventually a director myself. And then I put up a theater company with some colleagues, which is called Nine Works Theatrical. We produced Broadway and West End works here in Manila. And then eventually, as my tastes started to veer away from mainstream and into independent theater, that's when I put up the Sandbox Collective, of which I'm the managing artistic director of. And hopefully, we can do shows again, if not this year, next year.
Okay. So, given your work in the, as a creative, working in both publishing and performing arts before entering politics, how do you think this has influenced how you conducted yourself in Congress? And tell us a little bit more about why how you mainstreamed the creative industries within government.
So I remember my first term, I got the advice from then Senator Dick Gordon that um, outside of Congress, like maybe during like the night sessions, maybe I can take up law and maybe use that legal background to be able to better myself as a legislator. But I respectfully disagreed because I felt that I had to continue my creative work because it does offer a different perspective into my policy work. Um, Obviously, being a lifestyle journalist, you have to really probe into your subjects and really ask those like hard-hitting questions and dig, excavate, probe. And somehow it helped me really get to the bottom of issues as I talk to like my constituents. At the same time, all of my directing work also provided some kind of organizational skill in managing so many different teams. And I guess there is an element of theater in politics. There's an element of performance that you have to rely upon when you're lobbying or like working with different types of personalities and government institutions. And overall, creativity is something that provides you with a different sort of lens in which to assess a policy, um, a policy issue that needs to be discussed or tackled. So I saw merit in my work and the kind of perspectives that I brought to the table. And it was during a pivotal uh, course that I took at the Harvard Kennedy School on using behavioral science as an approach to designing public policy, where I encountered this idea of competing commitments that made me realize why, you know, 4 5 years into being a congressman, I was already in my second term then, uh, that I shied away from pursuing creative industry and cultural policy. I thought that maybe I had to be an expert in the field and that I had to be the crystal ball that knew everything when it doesn't have to be the case. And after being challenged by a lot of my peers during that class as to why I wasn't pursuing cultural and creative industry policy, I realized that yes, it was the fear factor. And I had forgotten the very concept of collaboration, which is, front and center to my work as a theater director, that even in government, you need to collaborate. And I realized that there are a lot of experts whose knowledge about the subject matter I can actually tap and activate to be able to pursue cultural and creative industry policy. So everyone from my colleagues in Congress who are experts in economics or experts in heritage preservation or experts in local government, all these areas that you have to galvanize towards really fighting for a cultural and creative industry policy. I was able to tap into all of these brilliant minds. And of course, from the private sector, all the captains of industry who, knowing that, there was this legislator, policymaker who wanted to make a difference and be able to address pain points in their respective industries, who just wanted to be of service to the community. They all sort of just really rallied behind this advocacy that we started. And so it was really the pandemic that accelerated all of this. And given, teleconferencing and Zoom, that made it easier for everyone to sort of, vault in and get together and talk about issues, that we were able to really assemble all of these initiatives that ultimately led to the lobbying for the creative industry bill. So, yeah, I think everything happened for a reason: right place, right time, right moment in time. And yeah, we're now at the cusp of this bill becoming a law. It's July 18 here, Manila time. And so in 9 days time, assuming no hitches will happen, the creative industry bill will become a law.
Okay. So, Toph, can you give us a situation of like prior to the bill, what was the Philippines? What did we have in terms of that? What was the situation of the creative industries in the Philippines?
The creative industries have been there. There are a lot of creative enterprises that have been operating against all odds with hardly any institutional support or acknowledgement from government, unless maybe they won some kind of award abroad. That's when government jumps on board to congratulate. But, no subsidies, no incentives, sometimes lack of a governance framework, a very siloed approach to industrial development. There are some government agencies that cater to some sectors of the creative economy, but that would only be, let's say, 2 to 5% of the total or the overall pie. Uh, the Filipino creative is really passionate and scrappy and will do everything in his or her power to be able to succeed. But again, it's always against all odds. You have the creative youth of the country being dissuaded by their parents from entering the field because it's not sustainable. There's no future to be had in the creative industries. Everything is Metro Manila centric. If you want to be a creative, you would have to leave your hometown, your home province, and move to Metro Manila and duke it out with other creatives in a very saturated field. There is a um mismatch between what the industries require and also the training that is happening in our K to 12, as well as higher and tertiary educational institutions. There is a lack of recognition of the creative industries overall in both the national and local level, in terms of their contributions to the economy, in terms of socioeconomic strategies and plans. And so basically, all of these efforts that are being undertaken by individual enterprises or freelancers or creatives, they don't seem to ladder up into what South Korea perhaps has, which is like the really the ubiquity of the Hallyu wave. um I always look to their example as to how governments seem to have gotten it right, all the way back in 1997 under then President Kim Dae-jung. And, decades later, they are reaping the benefits of what they planned for strategically. And here we are always taking for granted the Filipino creative and what is inherent in each one of us, which is our talent, which somehow is truly world class. And so, just like you, Mitch, I mean, as a fashion designer, and just so many different creatives from all these fields, and that's essentially why we proposed this measure, the Philippine Creative Industries Development Bill. Hopefully, it will become a law in a few days, so that we can first and foremost define what the Philippine creative industries are and who are included. It's very, very broad. We've identified as many as 50 different industries included in this framework, which we aggregated into 9 strategic domains following the UNCTAD framework. And we could have chosen the WIPO framework or the UNESCO framework, but after thorough study and debate in the committee hearings, we settled for the OCTAD framework. And then after defining what the creative industries are, then we sort of create a government agency that will be primarily charged with developing the sector. So this is the Philippine Creative Industry Development Council, which will be attached to the Department of Trade and Industry. It will be comprised of both private sector representatives from each of the 9 domains, as well as ex officio members from government agencies that have something to do with all creative industries, and their productivity and strategic growth. And then, uh, after the agency is created in partnership with the larger private sector stakeholders, then there will be a plan, a creative industry development plan, which will chart short-term, medium-term, and long-term growth trajectory for each of these industries. So in the bill, we identify clear KPIs or key performance indicators, such as job generation, revenue generation, contribution to GDP, which based on a study that was conducted almost a decade ago, it was estimated to be around 7.34% of total GDP based on the copyright based industry framework, which is just another term for creative industries. In fact, in Korea, I think it's called content industries. So it goes by many names. And then, of course, besides revenue, job, and GDP, there's also market creation and expansion as a KPI. I think it's very important that we're able to grow the market domestically and overseas. We also identify intellectual property generation as a KPI because that is the foundation and the differentiator of creative industries from other industries. It's that propensity for intellectual property. And then, of course, export. Um, I think based on the recent study that was released by UNCTAD, the Philippines is number one in terms of the export of our creative services. And we are number five in ASEAN in terms of the export of our creative goods. And as you sort of aggregate it, in the end, we are number five overall in ASEAN in terms of the export of our creative goods and services. So obviously, we've been overtaken by a lot of our neighbors in ASEAN because they were quick to identify creativity as an economic strategy. So we really have to play catch up. We identified 2030 as the year in which the Philippines should be the number one creative economy in all of ASEAN. So we do have a very ambitious plan moving forward. And that will be achieved through the many other um, salient features that will be found in the bill. Everything from capacity building, creative education, infrastructure, incentives, shared service facilities, um, uh, sort of synergizing the local government initiatives to the national government efforts so that we can create more creative cities across the country, across the archipelago, um, one-stop shop for creative enterprises, for ease of doing business, research and development support, digitalization support, um, grants, startup grants to creative enterprises and individuals who want to formalize into the economy. Um, and many other services actually that the creatives have been longing for all these years. So I guess that's the situation in a nutshell.
And how was it in terms of response? Like, how was the government response, and how difficult was it to educate our government? I saw that you had to do. I don't know if it was your project, the Creative City Playbook in 2021, which was a move to like help local governments. But how was the response to the Creative Industries Bill when you launched it within government? Like, did they need to adapt? Were they kind of closed off? Did they not have the understanding of what is necessary, as many of them are non-creatives? I don't know.
Yeah, it's all of that really. It's sort of demystifying this idea or concept of the creative economy and being able to speak in a language that bureaucrats and government agencies would understand. You mentioned the Creative City Playbook. It's a project that we commissioned through DTI and FEMS through their ICE program so that we can provide cities with some kind of guide as to how to use creativity for their own socioeconomic agenda. The objectives of that are two-pronged. One really is to incubate cities to use creativity as a way forward. And another one is to accelerate cities that are already creative and are on the cusp of joining the prestigious UNESCO Creative City Network, in which to date, we have two cities in the Philippines that have successfully qualified. So the first was Baguio for craft and folk art, and then the second one was Cebu for design. And what's interesting is that the institutionalization of this Philippine Creative Cities Network, which is sort of our local response to the existence of the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, which is so hard to get into. And in every cycle, the UNESCO National Commission of the Philippines can only really endorse two applications. And last year, they endorsed two cities, both of which unfortunately didn't make the cut. So it's such a prestigious club, and it's hard to get into that. But meanwhile, we don't want to um, not act on the proclivity and the desire of cities to turn towards creativity and creative industries. So we wanted to come up with a local network that would be primarily a sharing platform for cities and advocates and national government agencies to be able to work together to start creative initiatives in the grassroots and in their local communities. And so what's interesting is that this is a feature of the bill. However, we're so aggressive and so much needs to be done that we're not really putting all our eggs in one basket. Instead, a lot of the features in the bill we are starting to implement already through close collaboration with government agencies, and that playbook is one such program that has already been completed and has been disseminated to cities that have expressed a desire to join the network. So I guess what we're looking at now is the sustainability of these initiatives, because a lot of the programs are being implemented pro bono by people who are just really passionate about this advocacy. Whereas with the passage of the bill, it will institutionalize a program like the Philippine Creative Cities Network, and making it, or rather charging the Philippine Creative Industries Development Council to be able to implement that and have the program regularly funded. And so, yes, it was very challenging to get everybody on board. But as we met with more and more industries through informal Zoom sessions or even through official committee hearings, we were able to get a better sense of all these industries and what they need, and then be able to tailor policies that will be more responsive to addressing such. And in fact, earlier this afternoon, Project Dora, which is um, an initiative of the NCCA that we funded, was able to present their initial findings on four different sectors, including gastronomy, heritage, visual arts, and performing arts. And so the findings were, well, far from complete and far from being exhaustive. However, they are the beginnings of what can be ultimately like a developmental roadmap and a way forward for these four sectors. We also commissioned a study with the DOST, National Research Council, for a study on the music industry. And then we've also aligned with the Film Development Council and the National Book Development Board to also craft developmental roadmaps for film and for publishing. And then the DTI, we also provided funding to be able to craft developmental roadmaps for sectors like book magazines and print media, advertising, software, game development, animation. And it's sort of like a work in progress. Like every budget cycle, we will be funding more roadmaps to be crafted, as well as a satellite account with the Philippine Statistics Authority so that we can more or less um, measure the contribution of these sectors so that we can get a better sense of like what they bring to the GDP and how many jobs really are being created and how much revenue is being infused into our economy, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess since I mentioned earlier the need to demystify what creative industries really means for all these decision makers and policy makers who I was working with. There's initially a lot of confusion as to whether creative industries is, you know, arts and culture, primarily arts and culture, or is it science and technology? Is it business? Is it innovation? The answer is actually it's all of it. So it's in that area within all these concentric circles. And we also needed to be able to define based on the KPIs and delineate the role of this new agency uh, charged with developing the sector versus all the other cultural agencies that are existing within the government bureaucracy. So that was initially a challenge, but eventually we did arrive at some kind of consensus moving forward, and how all these eight government agencies, whether creative or heritage or S&T and nature or trade, can all work together towards really advancing the sector towards our 2030 goal of being the number one creative economy in all of ASEAN.
Because as a young person yourselves, who has been involved in the arts from such an early age, and been part of the creative industries, what is it that you would like to create for other young people, young creatives, like in terms of youth employment within the creative industries? What are your goals for them, or what would you like, yeah, your policy to implement for them?
Yeah, so I realized not everyone can be an entrepreneur, or not everyone is meant to uh, own an enterprise. Some are really more comfortable, for example, being employees or being workers and being able to do their own creative work outside of needing to worry about marketing it, or um, having to distribute it through as many channels as possible. And so, my dream is that whether one wishes to be a creative entrepreneur or a creative worker, that there are opportunities available to them. So for the creative worker, um, my dream is that there are as many creative enterprises that they can work for, whether as an employee in a creative firm or business, for example, a music label or a film company or a theater company, or a fashion enterprise, or a software company, or a game development firm. The goal really is to have these available not just in Metro Manila, but across the archipelago. And then if a creative worker wishes to be a freelancer, the goal is really to have as many opportunities for them to be able to have work, to be contracted for work, to be protected as well. And that's why we're also pushing for the Freelance Workers Protection Bill to be enacted, at least in this incoming Congress, since it wasn't enacted into law in the previous Congress. And then, of course, for creative entrepreneurs and creative businesses, to enjoy a gamut of services from government to help them really thrive and get to the next level. Things like incentives, um, things like the one-stop shop centers that I was talking about earlier to be able to streamline government permits and not have to be burdened by, red tape, and having to navigate the bureaucracy, um, for there to be grants, and subsidies provided to creative enterprises. Something that we actually also institutionalized in the bill is the venture fund, so that if you are a startup and are looking for investors, and you want to consider the state as one of the investors in your creative enterprise, then that will be made available to you, if you can't find it from the private sector. And so, overall, the dream really is for the creative youth, whatever their proclivity is, whether in entrepreneurship or in creative work, to have support, to be able to have an agency to turn to, that will look out for their welfare, that will ensure their viability and their success and their sustainability. And I guess this is coming from a personal place of, being a creative entrepreneur, first a creative worker, eventually a creative entrepreneur, and, not having any kind of support mechanism that was available to me other than, um, the love of my parents, and being able to give me the resources that I need to be able to, for example, put up a show or start my own theater company. But normally that costs money, and there's a lot of risk involved, in mounting a theater production. For example, uh, maybe almost 100% of the revenue comes from ticket sales. And so you have to be scrappy and creative in selling those tickets versus, the European theater model where, 40 to 50% of the revenue comes from state subsidy. And so that already clears you with 50% of the pressure of being able to even just recover your costs, if not even churn out a profit. And so, um, we've dealt with all of these grim realities as creatives, all these years slash decades, and hopefully that will change for the future generation when there's more support and enthusiasm coming from both government and the private sector as these markets develop and expand. And I suppose we are able to really harness the full potential of what is called an intellectual property ecology, which I sort of liken to this German concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is like the total art. I do imagine a future where all these creative industries are just sort of synergizing and interfacing with each other, cross-pollinating ideas, entering into all these collaborations, extending the potential of their intellectual property, finding expressions for the narratives and stories, that they come up with, such that, for example, a collection by Mitch Dulce can become an app or a game, or can find expression also in film or advertising or even in gastronomy. I mean, just the possibilities are endless, really. And I think there's no one who's uh, more ready for these creative explorations than the Filipino creative, because again, we are just brimming with creativity and we are world class, and I pride our country in being that.
Like you mentioned your family, like the support of your family, and like you and me were both kind of in a privileged context, right? Which is so different to the rest of with a lot of creatives in the Philippines who don't have that kind of exposure. Us, we were able to like travel and see, as a fashion designer, I can, see what fashion is like in other parts of the world. And you are able to go to different shows everywhere. Um,
Mm.
and whether it's like finance or whether it's our exposure, that's something that a lot of people don't have. They don't have that same privilege that we have. So, how do you think we could better and create more effective access for those who have talent but don't have that privilege of exposure, of learning, of all these different things?
So in a lot of the services that are institutionalized in this bill, everything from scholarships, not just for students but also for practitioners and teachers, to be able to study abroad, and be exposed to all these cultures, or marketing opportunities for creatives and creative enterprises with products or services to be able to participate in international trade shows, from what SITEM has to offer to what the Philippine embassies can do and extend to these creatives, um, to uh, just basically a lot of opportunities also online, to be able to create these avenues for exploration and for education and capacity building and training. All of that is actually addressed in the bill. And so, um, of course, with the on the local level, there is this concept of sister cities, and of course, the Philippine Creative Cities Network being institutionalized, and how it can possibly synergize with all the other country creative city networks that are present. And of course, as more cities qualify into the UNESCO Creative City Network, and just like the global network and exposure that can provide to the grassroots creatives, there's just really a lot of opportunities that will open up through the enactment of this measure. So yeah, we are, yeah, very much looking forward to that. And I think, for example, I was talking about like starting a creative enterprise, and I thank my parents for giving me, for example, the capital to be able to put up my own company. But in the bill, again, I mentioned earlier the startup fund, for those who want to formalize into the economy. They get fiscal grants to be able to register their businesses, and in so doing, for example, in obtaining receipts, to be able to give to potential clients in exchange for the rendering of services or providing goods, then that essentially opens up the creative uh, to being able to access bigger clients, for example, to being able to access loans from banks, to be able to invest in equipment or upskilling of themselves or their workers. In fact, there are also preferential loans that are being extended to creatives and creative enterprises in the bill. Um, but inadvertently, by already defining the creative industries and the sectors that are included already, there is a legal framework from which the freelance creative can be able to explain the kind of work that they do to the BIR, for example, or when they're applying for visas abroad. I mean, that's always a challenge, how to prove that you are indeed a creative working in your field. They ask for so much documentation because again, there's just so much confusion with regards to the creative and who falls under this category. And so these are um, these are unintended positive consequences also that will come from the enactment of this measure. So yeah, lots of access and benefits to the local creative.